I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in a beautiful house overlooking Puget Sound, where my mother Claire raised me alone after my father died in a car accident when I was 8 years old, and life was peaceful until Mom remarried when I was 16 to a wealthy businessman named Richard who owned a chain of successful restaurants throughout the Pacific Northwest. Richard brought his daughter Emma into our lives, a manipulative 15-year-old who'd been spoiled rotten by her deceased mother's family and had a history of lying to get attention, from faking illnesses to get out of school to making up stories about being bullied to manipulate teachers and counselors. Emma was beautiful in that calculated way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, but she had this cold look in her blue eyes that made me uncomfortable, especially when she'd smile sweetly at adults while shooting me venomous glares when they weren't looking. From the moment she moved into our house, Emma made it clear she resented my presence, complaining to Richard that I was weird and unfriendly because I didn't immediately welcome her with open arms, and she'd constantly try to get me in trouble by breaking things and claiming I did it, or lying about conversations we'd had to make me look bad. My mother, desperate to make her new marriage work, always pushed me to be more understanding and sisterly toward Emma, even when I tried to tell her about Emma's manipulative behavior and the cruel things she'd say to me when we were alone. Richard, blinded by love for his daughter, believed every word Emma said and treated me like an outsider in my own home, making snide comments about how I needed to respect family and learn to get along with his precious daughter. Emma was smart enough to never cross the line too far initially, content to make my life miserable with small cruelties, like accidentally ruining my homework, spreading rumors about me at school, or convincing her new friends to exclude me from social events, all while maintaining her perfect daughter act in front of our parents. When I graduated high school and got accepted to the University of Washington with a partial scholarship, Emma threw a fit about how I was abandoning the family and convinced Richard that I was ungrateful for all he'd done for us, even though he barely contributed to my college expenses since Mom had her own savings. College was my escape from Emma's toxicity, and I thrived at UO, majoring in computer science, making genuine friends, and dating a wonderful guy named Alex, who treated me with the respect I'd never gotten at home. But Emma's jealousy only grew worse during my college years, especially when she started struggling academically and socially at her private high school, unable to maintain the perfect image she'd cultivated without constant parental support and attention. She began calling me constantly, claiming she was lonely and missed me, but really she was fishing for information about my life to use against me later, asking detailed questions about my relationship with Alex, my grades, and my future plans. When I was 23 and had just landed a great job at a tech startup in downtown Seattle, making more money than I'd ever dreamed of, Emma's behavior escalated dramatically. She was now 18 and had been caught shoplifting, drinking underage, and failing multiple classes, causing Richard to finally see cracks in his perfect daughter's facade. Our mother had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer and was undergoing treatment, making her vulnerable and emotional, which Emma exploited by positioning herself as the devoted daughter who was sacrificing her social life to care for her sick mother. During one of Mom's chemotherapy sessions, Emma pulled me aside and made a chilling threat. "You think you're so special with your fancy job and perfect boyfriend, but I can destroy you anytime I want," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "Everyone loves me more than you, and if you don't start showing me more respect, I'll make sure you lose everything." I thought she was just being dramatic, but Emma had been planning something much worse. She'd been documenting fake evidence of abuse, taking photos of bruises she'd given herself, creating a detailed journal of alleged incidents that never happened, and even recording herself crying and claiming I'd hurt her. The false accusation came on a Sunday evening in March when our parents were at dinner with Richard's business partners, and Emma called 911, claiming I'd attacked her during an argument about household chores, showing up at the hospital with bruises on her arms and a split lip that she'd clearly inflicted on herself. The police arrived at our house and arrested me based on Emma's statement and the physical evidence she'd manufactured, and I spent the most humiliating night of my life in a jail cell, trying to explain to detectives that my stepsister was lying while they looked at me like I was a monster. Emma's performance at the hospital was Oscar-worthy. She sobbed to nurses and police officers about how I'd always been jealous of her relationship with our parents and had been escalating my abuse for years, showing them a fake journal filled with detailed accounts of violence that never occurred. She claimed I'd threatened to make her disappear if she ever told anyone about the abuse, and that she'd been too scared to report it until now because she was afraid I'd follow through on my threats. The story made local news because Richard's restaurants were well known in Seattle, and the headlines screamed about the tech worker accused of abusing stepsister, complete with my mugshot and Emma's tearful interview where she played the brave victim finally speaking out against her abuser. My employer placed me on administrative leave pending the investigation. Alex's parents questioned whether they wanted their son dating someone with a history of violence, and I watched my carefully built life crumble while Emma basked in the sympathy and attention she'd always craved. Our mother, weak from chemotherapy and devastated by the accusations, was torn between believing her biological daughter and supporting her stepdaughter, while Richard was absolutely convinced of my guilt and threatened to press charges for every penny of damage to his family's reputation. The criminal case moved forward quickly, with Emma's testimony backed by her fake evidence and the manufactured physical injuries, and my court-appointed lawyer seemed convinced I should take a plea deal rather than risk a trial that could result in years in prison. But I knew I was innocent and refused to admit to crimes I didn't commit, even when the prosecutor offered me a reduced sentence in exchange for a guilty plea and anger management counseling. That's when I decided to fight back with everything I had, hiring a private investigator named Sarah who specialized in false accusation cases and had a reputation for uncovering the truth when others couldn't. Sarah immediately noticed inconsistencies in Emma's story. The timing of the alleged abuse didn't match my work schedule. The injuries weren't consistent with the violence she described, and her medical records showed a pattern of suspicious injuries dating back years that had never been reported. We discovered that Emma had been researching domestic violence cases online, studying how real victims described their experiences and copying their language and symptoms for her own fake testimony. The breakthrough came when Sarah obtained Emma's phone records and found searches for how to make bruises look worse, self-harm techniques, and how to lie convincingly in court, along with deleted photos showing Emma practicing facial expressions and testing makeup techniques to simulate injuries. We also found text messages between Emma and her friends where she bragged about finally getting rid of me and talked about how she'd inherit more money from Richard once I was out of the picture. The most damning evidence was a video Emma had accidentally backed up to her cloud storage, showing her hitting herself with a hammer to create the bruises she'd claimed were from my assault, practicing her crying and victim voice, and even rehearsing her testimony for the police. Sarah also uncovered Emma's history of false accusations dating back to middle school, including claims of bullying that had been proven false, allegations against a teacher that resulted in his temporary suspension until security footage cleared him, and reports of harassment from classmates that were later revealed to be fabricated. The medical examiner re-examined Emma's injuries and concluded they were inconsistent with her claims, showing patterns of self-inflicted trauma rather than assault by another person, and a psychological evaluation revealed Emma had borderline personality disorder and a history of manipulative behavior. When we presented this evidence to the prosecutor, the charges against me were dropped immediately, and Emma suddenly found herself facing serious criminal charges for filing false reports, perjury, and obstruction of justice. The truth came out in spectacular fashion during a press conference where my lawyer presented the video evidence of Emma manufacturing her injuries, and the same media outlets that had destroyed my reputation now had to report on how they'd been manipulated by a skilled liar. Emma's reaction to being exposed was explosive. She screamed at reporters that I'd somehow faked the evidence against her, that I was evil and had brainwashed everyone into believing her lies, and that she was still the real victim in the situation. Richard was devastated when he saw the video evidence, realizing his daughter had manipulated him for years and that he'd almost helped destroy an innocent person's life, while our mother was heartbroken but relieved to finally understand why she'd always felt something was wrong with Emma's stories. The legal consequences for Emma were severe. She was charged with multiple felonies, including perjury, false reporting, and attempting to pervert the course of justice, facing up to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. The civil lawsuit I filed against her for defamation, emotional distress, and damage to my reputation sought millions in damages, and her future inheritance from Richard was frozen to pay for potential judgments. Richard publicly apologized to me and our mother, admitting he'd been blind to his daughter's manipulative behavior, and offering to pay for therapy and any other support I needed to recover from the trauma Emma had caused. Emma's trial was a media sensation, with the prosecution presenting overwhelming evidence of her elaborate deception, including the self-harm video, her internet search history, and testimony from experts about her psychological manipulation tactics. She was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the judge calling her actions a calculated assault on the justice system and noting that false accusations harm real victims of abuse. The civil case resulted in a judgment of $3.2 million in damages, bankrupting Emma's trust fund and ensuring she'd face financial consequences for her lies for the rest of her life. Today, I'm rebuilding my life with the support of people who truly care about me. My job welcomed me back with a promotion and public apology. Alex stood by me throughout the ordeal, and we're now engaged. And my mother has made a full recovery from cancer with a new understanding of who her daughters really are. Richard has become a genuine father figure to me, working hard to make amends for his past blindness and treating me as the daughter he wishes Emma could have been. Emma writes me letters from prison, alternating between claiming she's found Jesus and asking for forgiveness, and sending threatening messages about how she'll make me pay when she gets out. But I'm not afraid of her anymore. I've started a nonprofit organization to help people falsely accused of crimes, using my experience and the settlement money to provide legal support and resources to others who've been victimized by manipulative liars. The most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't seeing Emma go to prison. It was watching her perfect victim act crumble in court as everyone finally saw her for what she really was, a calculating sociopath who was willing to destroy innocent people to get what she wanted. As I sit in my beautiful new apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, planning my wedding to Alex and running my successful nonprofit, I know that sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving and thriving while your enemies face the consequences of their own evil actions.